Thanksgiving always had a way of bringing out the best and worst in my family. I guess that's true for most families, but in ours, it wasn't just about turkey or politics, it was about old wounds that never quite healed. My name is Sarah Jenkins, and this is the story of the last Thanksgiving we were all together. I grew up in a small town in Illinois, the kind of place where everyone knows your business before you do. My mom, Carol, was a perfectionist with a capital P. She was the kind of woman who believed a pie was only as good as its crust, and she made damn sure hers were flawless. My dad, Bill, was quieter, a high school history teacher who let my mom run the show. And then there were my siblings, Rachel, the golden child, Luke, the rebel, and me, the peacekeeper. The year everything changed, I was 36, recently divorced, and back in my childhood bedroom after 15 years away. My ex-husband, Mark, had left me for his secretary, and I came home licking my wounds. Rachel, who lived 2 towns over, was married to her high school sweetheart, Greg, with 2 perfect kids and a golden retriever. Luke was, well, no one really knew where Luke was most of the time. He'd pop up every few years with a new scheme or girlfriend, but he always seemed to vanish before things got serious. That Thanksgiving, my mom decided to host dinner at our house, just like old times. It would be the first time in years all of us were under the same roof. She insisted on doing everything herself, from the turkey to the 3 different kinds of pie. "This is how families stay connected," she said, her hands dusted with flour as she rolled out dough. "We sit together. We eat. We talk." But my dad looked worried. He always did when Luke was involved. The trouble started when Luke showed up an hour late with a woman none of us had ever met. She was tall, blonde, and wearing a leather jacket that smelled like cigarettes. Her name was Crystal, yes, with a C, and she was the kind of woman who didn't ask permission to light a cigarette on the porch even though the "No smoking" sign was clearly visible. Rachel's jaw tightened the moment she saw her. "Really, Luke?" she whispered to me as we set the table. "He couldn't just come alone for once?" I shrugged. At least he showed up. When we finally sat down to eat, the tension was palpable. My mom kept her smile plastered on, even as Luke poured Crystal an oversized glass of wine and whispered something that made her giggle. Rachel tried to steer the conversation towards safer topics, the kids, the weather, but it was only a matter of time before the cracks started showing. "So, Luke," my dad asked, cutting into his turkey, "what are you up to these days?" Luke leaned back in his chair, grinning. "You mean besides trying to survive this interrogation?" "Bill's just making conversation," my mom interjected, her tone tight. "No, it's fine," Luke said, taking a sip of wine. "Let's see. I'm working on a business deal. Could be big. Really big." Rachel rolled her eyes. "Another deal, huh? Is this like the time you tried to sell organic beard oil?" Crystal laughed, and Luke's face darkened. "For your information, this one's legit." "Oh, I'm sure it is," Rachel shot back. "Until it isn't." "Rachel," my mom warned, but it was too late. The argument spiraled from there, dredging up years of resentment. Luke accused Rachel of being a stuck-up know-it-all. Rachel called Luke a selfish screw-up. My mom begged them to stop, while my dad stared at his plate, chewing in silence. And me? I just sat there, gripping my wine glass, wishing I could disappear. It was Crystal who finally broke the tension. She stood up, her chair screeching against the floor, and said, "You people are insane. I'm gonna go smoke." Then she grabbed her purse and stormed out the front door. Luke followed her, muttering something under his breath. My mom looked like she might cry. "I just wanted one nice dinner," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll talk to him," I offered, though I wasn't sure why. Luke and I had never been close, but someone had to try. I found him on the porch, pacing back and forth while Crystal puffed on her cigarette. "Luke," I said quietly, "can we talk?" He turned to me, his face red with anger. "What's there to talk about, Sarah? They've already made up their minds about me." "No one's against you," I said, though even I didn't believe it. "They're just worried." "Worried?" he scoffed. "Rachel's not worried. She just likes to feel superior." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You know, I didn't bring Crystal here to start trouble. I wanted them to see that I'm doing okay. That I'm happy." His words hit me harder than I expected. "Luke," I said softly, "no one thinks you're a failure." He laughed bitterly. "Sure they don't." I wanted to say more, to tell him that I understood how he felt, but before I could, Crystal stubbed out her cigarette and said, "I'm ready to go." Without another word, they walked to Luke's car and drove off. Back inside, the rest of the night was awkward. My mom tried to salvage dessert, but no one had much of an appetite. Rachel left early, muttering something about needing to put the kids to bed. My dad helped with the dishes in silence. And me? I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair where Luke had been. It was the last Thanksgiving we were all together. A few months later, my dad had a heart attack and passed away. Luke didn't come to the funeral. Rachel and I still talk, but things have never been the same. Looking back, I wish I'd done more to hold us together. But families are messy, complicated things. Sometimes, all you can do is love them from a distance and hope they find their way back to you. And sometimes, they don't. Life after that Thanksgiving felt like a series of unraveling threads, each one connected to a memory of what we once had. My dad's passing marked the start of a quiet, collective drift. Mom tried to keep us tethered, weekly phone calls, Sunday dinners, holiday plans, but it wasn't the same without him. Rachel grew more withdrawn. She buried herself in PTA meetings, soccer practices, and her perfect suburban life, but I could sense cracks beneath the surface. Her marriage to Greg, once the picture of stability, seemed strained. She never outright admitted it, but during one rare heart-to-heart, she said, "You ever feel like you're just going through the motions, Sarah? Like you're living someone else's life?" I didn't know how to answer. I'd been feeling like that for years. Luke remained a ghost. He called Mom a few times after Dad died, promising to visit, but he never did. I'd get updates through mutual acquaintances. He was in Texas, then California, then back to Illinois, always chasing some dream that seemed just out of reach. I wanted to be angry at him for abandoning us, especially Mom. But a part of me understood. Coming home meant facing all the things he'd spent his life running from. And in some ways, I envied his freedom. At least he didn't feel obligated to pretend everything was fine. Then, 2 years after Dad's death, everything came to a head. It was mid-November, and Mom was planning another Thanksgiving dinner. She called me one night, her voice unusually chipper. "Guess who's coming this year?" she asked. "Rachel?" I guessed, though I knew that wasn't the news. "No, Luke," she said, practically beaming through the phone. "He called me yesterday. Said he's finally coming home." "Really?" I said, trying to mask my skepticism. "Yes, really. And he's bringing someone. A fiancé." I nearly dropped the phone. "Fiancé? Since when is Luke engaged?" "Oh, I don't know all the details yet, but isn't it wonderful?" Mom said, her voice full of hope. "Maybe this is exactly what we need." I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to end in disaster. Still, I agreed to come, partly out of obligation, partly out of curiosity. What kind of woman had finally convinced Luke to settle down? And could she possibly survive the minefield of our family dynamics? When Thanksgiving arrived, the house was filled with the familiar smells of turkey, stuffing, and Mom's signature apple pie. Rachel showed up first, her kids in tow, though Greg had conveniently found a reason to stay home. She looked tired, her hair pulled back into a haphazard ponytail, but she plastered on a smile for Mom's sake. "I can't believe Luke's actually coming," she said as we set the table. "Do you think he'll actually show?" "He said he would," I replied, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. And then, just as the clock struck noon, Luke's car pulled into the driveway. The woman he brought wasn't at all what I expected. Her name was Anna, and she was nothing like Crystal. She was quiet, almost shy, with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile. She looked like someone who belonged in a small-town bakery, not on the arm of my unpredictable brother. Mom hugged them both tightly, her eyes glistening with tears. Rachel and I exchanged a skeptical glance, but we said nothing. For once, we wanted to give Luke the benefit of the doubt. Dinner started off better than I'd anticipated. Anna seemed genuinely sweet, and Luke, for once, was trying. He helped Mom carve the turkey, complimented her cooking, and even made small talk with Rachel's kids. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. But then the past came crashing in. It started innocently enough. Luke was telling a story about his latest business venture, a food truck that sold gourmet grilled cheese, and Rachel couldn't resist making a dig. "So, how long until this one goes under?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Luke's smile faltered. "Nice, Rachel. Real supportive." "I'm just saying, we've heard this before," she shot back. "Remember the beard oil? Or the time you tried to sell homemade kombucha?" "That's enough," Mom said, her voice sharp. But it was too late. Luke slammed his fork down. "You know what, Rachel? I'm sorry I'm not perfect like you. Sorry I don't have the perfect marriage or the perfect house or the perfect kids." Rachel's face turned red. "Perfect? Are you kidding me? You think my life is perfect? At least I don't run away every time things get hard. And at least I'm not trapped in a life I hate," Luke fired back. The room fell silent. Rachel's kids stared at their plates, wide-eyed. Mom buried her face in her hands. And me? I felt that familiar weight of being the peacekeeper, the one who had to fix everything. "Guys," I said, my voice shaking. "Can we not do this? Not tonight?" But neither of them was listening. The argument spiraled into chaos, dredging up years of resentment. Anna tried to calm Luke down, but he brushed her off. Rachel stormed out, dragging her kids with her. Mom started crying, and Luke, frustrated and angry, grabbed his coat and walked out the door. "Luke, wait." I called after him, but he didn't stop. I found him sitting in his car, his head resting on the steering wheel. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. But then he looked up at me, his eyes full of pain. "I don't belong here, Sarah," he said quietly. "I never have." "That's not true," I said, though I wasn't sure he believed me. "We're your family." He shook his head. "Family's supposed to make you feel whole. All we do is tear each other apart." That was the last time I saw Luke. He and Anna disappeared after that night, and none of us heard from him again. Mom kept calling, hoping he'd come around, but eventually, even she gave up. Rachel and I tried to fill the void, but it was like trying to patch a sinking ship with duct tape. Years later, I got a postcard from a small town in Oregon. It was from Luke. No return address, just a short note, "I'm okay. Hope you are too." I stared at that postcard for a long time, wondering if he'd ever come back. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't. Some families find their way back to each other. Ours didn't. But I like to think that, wherever Luke is, he's finally found the peace he was looking for. And maybe, in some way, that's enough. It's been over a decade since that Thanksgiving, and the house I grew up in feels like a museum now, silent, untouched, and filled with the ghosts of who we used to be. Mom passed away 5 years ago, not long after her 75th birthday. I was the one who stayed with her toward the end, sitting by her bedside as she faded into the same silence that seemed to take our family. Rachel and I still talk, though it's more out of habit than genuine closeness. We've both grown tired of rehashing the past. She stayed with Greg, though their marriage has settled into something more like a partnership of convenience. The spark is long gone, but they keep it together for the kids, who are teenagers now and barely acknowledge me during the rare family gatherings we managed to pull off. And Luke? Well, Luke is still a mystery. I think about him often, wondering where he is, who he's become, and whether he's happy. That postcard he sent years ago is still tucked in the back of my desk drawer. I've read it so many times I could recite it word for word, though it doesn't say much. I'm okay. Hope you are too. It's funny how 6 words can hold so much and so little at the same time. Sometimes I find myself imagining his life now. Maybe he's running a food truck somewhere, or maybe he finally settled down in a tiny house with Anna, or someone else entirely. Part of me wonders if he ever thinks about us, or if cutting ties was his way of finally finding peace. I've written him letters over the years, though I've never sent them. What would I even say? I miss you feels too simple. I'm sorry feels too late. So I just keep writing, hoping that someday, somehow, he'll read my thoughts and know he's still part of this family, even if we're broken. A few months ago, I got a call from Rachel. It was late at night, and I could tell from her voice that something was wrong. "Sarah," she said, her voice trembling, "I think I found Luke." I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" "One of Greg's old college friends. He lives in Portland. He said he saw Luke at this bar he goes to sometimes. Said he's working as a bartender." "Did he talk to him?" I asked, gripping the phone. "No," Rachel admitted. "But he's sure it's him. He even showed Greg a picture." "It's Luke, Sarah." I didn't know what to say. After all these years, the idea of finding Luke felt both thrilling and terrifying. What if he didn't want to be found? Rachel seemed to sense my hesitation. "Look," she said, "I'm not saying we show up unannounced or anything. But maybe. I don't know. Maybe you could write to him. Send a letter to the bar or something." I promised I'd think about it, though the idea filled me with unease. What if he didn't want to hear from me? What if reaching out only reopened old wounds? For weeks, I wrestled with what to do. Every night, I'd sit at my desk, staring at a blank sheet of paper, trying to find the right words. I wanted to tell him so much, that I missed him, that I understood why he left, that I didn't blame him. But the longer I thought about it, the harder it became to put pen to paper. Finally, I decided to keep it simple. I wrote, "Dear Luke, I heard you're in Portland. I don't know if you want to hear from me, but I just wanted to say that I miss you. Mom passed away a few years ago, and I think about you a lot. I hope you're happy, wherever you are. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Love, Sarah." I mailed the letter to the bar, half expecting it to be returned unopened. Weeks went by with no response, and I started to convince myself that he'd never even seen it. But then, one chilly October morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. The letter was short, but it said more than I'd dared hope for. "Sarah, I got your letter. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't come back sooner. There's a lot I'm still figuring out. I think about you and Rachel and Mom all the time. Maybe it's time we talked. I'm still at the bar. Come by if you can. Just, no pressure. Love, Luke." I sat there holding the letter for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Should I go? Would Rachel come with me, or would this be something I had to do alone? And what would I even say to him after all these years? A week later, I found myself on a plane to Portland. Rachel decided not to come, too many memories, she said, but she wished me luck and told me to call her the moment I saw him. When I walked into the bar, my heart was in my throat. It was small and dimly lit, the kind of place where the regulars all know each other by name. And there, behind the counter, was Luke. He looked older, of course, his hair was flecked with gray, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But he was still Luke. My brother. He looked up as I approached, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he smiled, that crooked, boyish smile I hadn't seen in years. "Hey, Sarah," he said, his voice soft. "Hey, Luke," I replied, my eyes welling up. We didn't hug right away. Instead, we just sat down and talked, about Mom, about Rachel, about everything and nothing. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't fix everything. But for the first time in years, I felt like we were on the path to something better. Sometimes, families fall apart. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a chance to put the pieces back together. And in that small, quiet bar in Portland, I realized that it's never too late to try. Thanksgiving had always been the turning point in our family, a day that promised unity but often delivered heartache. For years, I'd let the memories of that last chaotic Thanksgiving haunt me, like a movie I couldn't stop replaying. But sitting across from Luke in that small bar in Portland, something shifted. It was as if the weight of the years, the arguments, and the silences melted away. In their place was a quiet, tentative hope. "Can I get you something?" Luke asked, his voice almost shy, like he wasn't sure if I'd stayed out of obligation or genuine love. "A coffee, maybe," I said. "I'm still on Midwest time." He laughed softly, grabbed a mug from behind the counter, and poured me a cup. I watched him move, noticing the subtle signs of wear in his gait, the tired look in his eyes. Life hadn't been easy for him, but there was a steadiness about him now, a groundedness I hadn't seen in years. We sat in a corner booth, out of earshot of the few other patrons nursing their drinks. For a while, the conversation was light, about the bar, his life in Portland, and the relentless rain he'd grown used to. But eventually, we circled back to the reason I was there. "Why now?" I asked. "Why reach out after all these years?" Luke stared down at his coffee, turning the mug in his hands. "I don't know," he admitted. "I guess I just got tired of running. Tired of pretending like I didn't miss you. Miss all of you." "You didn't have to stay away," I said softly. "We would have made room for you, Luke. We always would have." He let out a bitter laugh. "Would you?" Every time I came home, it felt like a fight was waiting for me. Rachel couldn't help herself. Mom was always trying to fix me. And Dad, he trailed off, his jaw tightening. He never said it, but I know he was disappointed. "Dad loved you," I said, my voice trembling. "He didn't always understand you, but he loved you." Luke looked away, his eyes glistening. "I know that now. I just wish I'd figured it out sooner." For the first time, Luke told me about his years away, the string of failed businesses, the nights he spent sleeping in his car, the relationships that never lasted. Anna, the fiancée he'd brought to Thanksgiving, had left him after a year. She wanted stability, he said with a shrug. And I couldn't give it to her. "But you're stable now," I said, gesturing to the bar. He smiled faintly. "It's not much, but it's mine. The owner took a chance on me when I needed it, and now I'm part owner. Guess I finally found something I'm good at." I smiled back, feeling a swell of pride. "I'm glad, Luke. You deserve this." The hardest part came when we talked about Mom. I told him about her final days, how she'd always kept his picture on the mantel, even when it hurt too much to look at it. "She never stopped loving you," I said. "She never stopped waiting for you to come home." Luke swallowed hard, his face crumpling. "I should have been there. For her. For you. You're here now," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "That's what matters." When I got back to my hotel that night, I called Rachel. I told her about the bar, about how Luke looked older but happier, and about how much he wanted to see her. Rachel was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "I don't know, Sarah. It's been so long." "I know," I said. "But I think he's ready. And I think you are too." She sighed. Maybe. That, maybe, was more than I'd hoped for. Over the next few months, Luke and I stayed in touch. We called every Sunday, just like Mom used to do. He sent me photos of the bar, the mountains he hiked on his days off, and the dog he'd recently adopted, a scruffy mutt named Hank. Slowly, we began to rebuild what we'd lost. It took Rachel a little longer, but eventually, she came around. She and Greg planned a family trip to Portland the following summer, and I joined them. Seeing Luke with Rachel's kids, teaching them to play darts in the back of the bar, laughing at their terrible jokes, felt like watching a version of him I'd only dreamed about. Rachel and Luke still had their moments, of course. Old habits die hard. But they were trying, and that was enough. It's been 5 years since that first visit, and our family looks a lot different now. Rachel and Greg are still in the suburbs, but they seem happier, more at peace. Luke's bar has become a gathering place for locals, and he's even started hosting live music nights. As for me, I'm back in Chicago, working at a nonprofit and finally feeling like I've found my place. Every Thanksgiving, we rotate where we gather, Chicago, Portland, or Rachel's house. The dinners aren't perfect, they never will be. But they're real. We laugh, we bicker, and sometimes we cry. But we're together, and that's what matters. Looking back, I realize that families aren't defined by their broken moments. They're defined by the effort to put the pieces back together. It took us years to get here, but we made it. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Because in the end, love isn't about forgetting the past. It's about forgiving it.